Mr. Farrakhan?
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen of the press, visitors, in the name of Allah the Beneficent, the Merciful, it is a great honor and privilege for us as members of the Nation of Islam to have been invited to this World Parliament of Religion as a guest of the African American Host Committee. With that in mind, please feel free to ask any questions that you so desire. Yes, sir.
3 years back, Mr. Farrakhan, right here in this building in Palmer House, you have declared that the Muslim community is indeed one. Is this still true, or are there any ideological differences, or would you care to comment on this question?
Certainly, in the total Islamic community, there are differences, different schools of thought, different methods and approaches to solving problems. But basically, the Muslim community is one community. And we hope and pray that Allah will bless us to be an integral part of that one community. Although there are ideological or philosophical differences, and hopefully through dialogue and discussion, we can come to an equitable agreement over those differences. But we declare ourselves to be Muslims and members of the world community of Muslims. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, would you?
Yes, sir. This gentleman right here.
Mr. Farrakhan, how would you characterize your current relations with Imam Muhammad?
I would characterize those relations as brotherly. He is my brother. He is the son of my spiritual father. I have great love for him and respect for him, even though we have differences. But those differences should never be taken by outside community to be differences that would cause us to do injury or harm to one another. And as long as Imam Warithuddin and I are present, we shall always dialogue and hopefully resolve any differences between us, that ultimately we might become one community.
This gentleman, state your name and news affiliation when you ask your question.
My name is Andrew Cather. I'm a Jewish blogger in New York City.
Yes, sir.
Over the last several years, Mr. Farrakhan, you have participated in and initiated a series of dialogues with members of the Jewish community of the Jewish faith. Several weeks ago in the Chicago Sun-Times, in an interview, you seemed to cast some question on what direction that dialogue was going, and made some statements that were interpreted by the editors of the paper and elsewhere that seemed to say that there were certain Jewish control of the aspects of the African American community. Where do you now see that dialogue going? Thank you.
Certainly, wherever there are differences between human beings, the intelligent, the civilized thing to do is to sit and to talk about those differences, hoping perhaps that truth will prevail and justice will follow on the heels of truth, and wounds can be healed. We have hoped for and tried to get dialogue with members of the Jewish community, and we still do dialogue with members of the Jewish community. The rabbis with whom we talk and dialogue is one thing, but the secular Jewish community has a different view than the rabbis. And so they wish for me to apologize for statements that I have made before any dialogue can take place. And I have said to them, as I say to you, I am not above apology, but only when you show me where my statements are in error, then and only then will I go before the same world to which I made the statement in error and make the correction and make the appropriate apology. But that can never happen if there's not genuine dialogue. And so if they wish to dialogue with me, I'm open to dialogue, but I shall not ask again.
Thank you. Lady right here, please, and your name and your affiliation.
Mr. Farrakhan, I'm Joan Connell from Newhouse News Service in Washington. The Parliament of World Religions is considering a statement of global ethics. Are you familiar with that statement, and is it something that you could support and the Nation of Islam could support?
I just received the statement today. I have not had time to study it thoroughly. But generally, the things that are said in this global ethic are those things that we as Muslims could agree with. There are, of course, some things with which we might disagree, but I will know that better after studying the document. Tomorrow, I think I'll have a much more definitive statement.
The gentleman is right here.
The Quest from Chicago. In keeping with the desire for global change and peace, what role would you recommend our next generation playing for peace?
I would recommend that we look beyond labels and look to principles. For labels are divisive. Sometimes when we say Muslim, when we say Christian, when we say Jew or Buddhist or Hindu or Sikh or Shinto or Teo or Zoroaster, these are labels. And if we don't search beneath the label to discover the principles that undergird each religious philosophy, we will find ourselves rejecting each other simply because we are ignorant of the principles that undergird labels. The next generation, by God's grace, should study the religious teachings of the peoples of the world and develop a genuine respect for other people's traditions and ways, and try to learn from each other rather than condemn each other. The problem with our immaturity is that we each arrogate to our own individual tradition the best, as though the other has nothing to offer. And this robs us of the interchange that could fuel greater evolutionary development in religious thought. And so I would hope that not only the next generation does this, but that this generation begins that process.
The gentleman in blue jacket.
I'm Mike McManus. I write a newspaper column for about 100 pages.
Yes, sir.
I will not be able to hear your remarks tonight, and I'd like to ask you a question about your topic for the evening. You're talking about, as I understand it, black men, their role as fathers. As I understand it, the out-of-wedlock rate is extremely high in the black community.
Yes.
What do you suggest ought to be done about that?
Yes, I don't think, sir, we can talk about the out-of-wedlock rate in the black community without putting it in context. As you know, for 300 years, our mothers and fathers were sold as chattel slaves, and we were disallowed the privilege and the right of family, and we were disallowed the privilege and the right of marriage, which is the cornerstone of family. And the black male was treated as a stud horse, only to impregnate the female so that she could produce another slave. But we were disallowed the opportunity to develop family that we might take care of and nurture what we produced. So 300 years or 400 years later, we have the effect of that cause: gross immorality, disrespect of the female, and the lack of responsibility on the part of the black male in nurturing and caring for what we produce. So there has to be a total new teaching and way of civilizing the black man and woman, that we might remove from our people totally the scars of 400 years of slavery.
Can I follow-up question? In 1950, the out-of-wedlock rate for black was about 15%. In 1950, it's now about 60, 70%.
Yes.
Whites have also grown enormously. I'm not trying to... Whites were only 2% in 1950, now it's about 20-some%. It's grown tenfold among whites, so as I say, it's not a racial issue, but it's not just the 300 years of slavery that did it. Something's happened in the last 30 or 40 years.
Well, that is true. When I was a young boy, my mother, we didn't have a father in the house. My mother was there to nurture us and to give us the best that she knew. But since that time, there has been a great economic problem developing in America, particularly in the cities, where jobs are leaving the inner cities, factories are closing, and markets are opening up in third world countries, which leave most black males unemployed and unemployable. And there is nothing advanced to retrain the black male and get him ready either to work in the industries that are available or to create job opportunities for self. So what does that mean? If from 50 to 70% of the households in the black community are headed by a woman, then you relate that to the unemployment and the destruction of the black male as a responsible head of his family. And anytime a man does not have money, has no future in terms of employment, that man cannot be the real voice in his house. And so many just abandon the family and go out in the streets, and until we reclaim them, they will be lost. And this is why the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, to me, are so important, because it allows us not to put that responsibility on government, but to take that responsibility on our own shoulders, to reclaim our own young men and teach them and make them responsible citizens, responsible fathers and husbands.
The gentleman standing in the future, sir, your name and affiliation.
Timothy Bruni, I'm a City News Bureau of Chicago reporter. You did touch on one of the things that I was going to ask. What challenge do you offer to black men, other than the teachings of Muhammad and things like that, to become more involved in the family and the community?
If you understood the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, there is no greater challenge that you could offer to any man to submit himself to do the will of God, to clean up his life from alcohol, tobacco, drugs, illicit sex, to get married, create a job if you don't have one, and become a responsible father, a responsible husband. That's the challenge that our teaching gives to the man. And many, if not all of us who are Muslims, have accepted that challenge and are doing our best to live up to that challenge.
Gentlemen.
Richard Staples, BBC. What effect do you think Islam has had on the United States?
That's an excellent question. You know that America was founded by white people, basically for white people. And the basic document of this nation, the Constitution, was not in its original context framed for Native Americans, for blacks, for Hispanics, for Indians or Asians. Now, with the rush toward justice and peace and the struggle for equality, America has to decide whether she truly wants to be multicultural, multiracial, and American, or does America want to be exactly as the founding fathers envisioned? That would mean that blacks, Hispanics, Asians, Arabs would all be second-class citizens. What effect has the racist, sexist, materialist, nationalistic views in this society had on Islam? Well, the effect of racism on black people is that we have been made to believe that we are an inferior people. And as Jesus said, as a man thinketh, so is he. And whites in general, by the teachings of the school and the church and the society, have been made to believe that their whiteness gives them a badge of superiority. So superiority and inferiority cannot meet on common ground unless truth comes to destroy both the inferiority mentality of blacks and the superiority mentality of whites. And that has affected the method by which we brought Islam to black people, because we had to take a people who were taught to hate themselves and now teach them about race, which has nothing to do with Islam. Islam does not teach one race above another, one sex above another. Islam is teaching the spiritual development of human beings as one total human community. But we have not lived that way. And so the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, to effect change in us, had to give us a root in ourselves by teaching us the history of the black man to make us love ourselves. And then he pointed out the evils of white America, the evils practiced by so-called Christians on black people, which of course created a great uproar, but it caused you to think about your own actions toward the darker people. And now many whites are willing to change. And as blacks grow into their own manhood and self-esteem, we are willing to accommodate that change. And perhaps with more growth, we might ultimately become a human community, not a white community or a black community or a yellow and brown community, but we might ultimately become human beings. We have not reached humanity yet. Humanity is something that the human is striving to attain, but the condition of the world is bestiality masked in so-called humanity.
Rachel Kong, Australian Broadcasting Corporation. The values which you articulated for the black community are indeed noble ones. They are also ones that American Jews have upheld for many generations in this country. But did you imply in your vision of the ideal America that secular Jews would somehow not be part of that ideal vision?
No, I didn't imply that. But what I'm seeing, not only with secular Jews or with secular Christians, is that the spiritual people have abdicated their responsibility to guide the secular community. So the secular community holds more power than the spiritual community, not only among Jews, but among Christians, among Muslims. And this has to stop. If we are going to produce global peace, then the spiritual teachers must not be subservient to political machinations and political parties. We must be the party of God, and we must speak the word of God and guide politicians rather than let their political machinations guide and corrupt the precepts and moral teachings of God and his prophets.
The gentleman in the glasses.
West in Chicago. Mr. Farrakhan, you've spoken several times about the effects that slavery and black oppression of the past have had on the black society today. How do you respond to those who say that it is time to put the past behind us and move on towards the future and forget the bad effects of the country?
Yes. I notice that that is always brought up to black people, but that's not brought up to you and your people. Your people never seem to forget the past, and that's why what happened in the past is never repeated in the present. This is why people say, remember Pearl Harbor, because if you remember Pearl Harbor will not happen again. Remember the Alamo. The Jews tell their youngsters, remember the Holocaust. Why? Because if you remember the evils of the past, you don't want to be buried in the past, but you must be guided by history. Otherwise, today we will make the same mistakes that we made yesterday. And so we don't bring these things up to encourage hatred. We bring the past up that we may be guided by the decisions that were made for us, by the decisions that we made that were incorrect, and then we move on. But no intelligent people moves on without being guided by the lessons of history.
Mr. Al-Rafai from Chicago. Mr. Farrakhan, in Monday's edition of the Chicago Defender front page, there was a story about the March on Washington and the Jewish organization writing to the organizers of this march to bar you from participating in this march. What will be your comment about this? Because I saw it as part of the control that we're talking about, where black people are being divided based on a different interest.
Well, if I might answer in this way, the Jewish community is not necessarily a poor and ragged community. From my vantage point, it is an intelligent community, generally speaking. It is an affluent community and an influential community. And it is a self-interested community. Here at the March on Washington, my brothers and sisters whom we met in Gabon at the African-American Summit, Coretta Scott King, Joe Lowery, Jesse Jackson, and a whole host of black leaders, we all agreed that we would come home to the United States and work for unity and to prepare a program that might relieve the suffering of our people who are dying in the streets of America. Unfortunately, when they asked me to be a part of the march, word was gotten by Mr. Rabbi David Saperstein to that effect. And he wrote or sent a fax to the civil rights leadership, Reverend Jackson, Fauntleroy, Ben Chavis, Bill Lucy, Coretta Scott King, William Gibson, the chairman of the board of the NAACP, urging them not to allow me to speak at the March on Washington, and that if I were to speak, they would pull out. And the threat, I understand, was so heavy that our brothers and sisters decided it was best that I not speak. This is sad. We are not allowed as black people to interfere in the affairs of Jews or Gentiles who are white. And you would call it an insult if we spoke to members of the Jewish community and told you who you could invite and whom you could not invite. An Italian, a Greek, a Polish person would feel insulted if we used any kind of leverage that we might have to tell you who you could invite or force you to disinvite somebody that you wanted to invite on the threat that you will pull out and pull your money out. And unfortunately, our civil rights leaders caved in to that threat, which bears witness to what I said earlier of Jewish influence and control over black leaders, black politicians, black arts and entertainment figures. That's not anti-Semitism. That's a fact. I'm not hating Jews because they have that control, but I dislike that kind of control because it disallows us to sit together as a family and discuss our problems and work out solutions to our problems without your interference. And we are going to demand that you stay out of our business and mind your own business. Since you are not going to help us deliver our people out of the condition that some of your fathers placed them in, then leave us alone and let us solve our own problems. That is my answer, and unfortunately, those same forces did not wish for me to be a part of this world parliament of religion. And it is my understanding that the Anti-Defamation League has pulled out, not from sponsorship of the parliament, but pulled out of this event. For what? Because we have a difference. But look downstairs at the conference. There are religious groups from all over the world, most of whom have differences with each other, some so serious that it has caused the shedding of blood in huge numbers. To the best of my knowledge, we have not had a bloody nose from a Jew, nor have we bloodied the nose of one Jew. But in a conference like this, that is organized that people of differences can sit down and dialogue and come up with a global ethic for peace, it is sad that with all of their intelligence that they would pull out simply because I'm going to make a speech tonight. They have framed my speech in such a way. He must talk about the black family, which there hardly is one. And, you know, you want me in a way that I won't disturb things. Well, I didn't come here to disturb anything, but I did come to tell the truth. And if a world parliament is not going to be based on truth, then what is it that will bring peace in the world? Some of us are so civilized that we don't speak straight words anymore because we don't wish to be offensive while we hide the truth, which is the greatest offense of all. And if we fail to speak truth, with respect for each other, then how will this global ethic trickle down to the masses of the people who we lead? I think that they need to be told, shame on you. Shame on you for allowing the participation of Louis Farrakhan in a speech that people don't even have to attend if they don't wish to. And you allow that to cause you to pull your participation away when you have so much to offer. That is a shame. We'll take 2 or 3 more questions.
2 more questions. Young lady, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Doreen Edwards, I'm with Chicago Access, Mr. Farrakhan. And I think that the attendance tonight at your speech will speak for the entire conference, because everywhere you go in this hall, people are talking about your speech tonight. So I would like to say, shame on the people who have. I have a question. There are some of us here in this room who are spiritually colorblind. And we are very alarmed that some of the groups, especially among your young people, who are the up-and-coming intelligentsia of the community of which you speak, and the colleges, who are forming groups where they're excluding everyone but blacks. And I don't see how this is very helpful, and I would like your comments on it, because I find it very difficult to swallow as one of those people who are colorblind.
Thank you. My dear young lady, you have had a long time to develop and evolve to your state of colorblindness. You, unfortunately, are not the majority. You are indeed a significant minority. We have lived in a society that is not colorblind, and we are affected by the racism of this society. So as we awaken to the knowledge and love of self, we want to get together among ourselves. We want to find common ground with one another, that our division may become unity. And from that unity, we might develop the strength to overcome all the obstacles in the society that have been placed in the pathway of our progress. So when you see this, ma'am, say, oh, we were like that once. And give them a chance to grow, because I too was like that. And when I became a follower of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I was so glad to learn something of my own self and kind. I wanted to reach out to every black man and woman to bring about a unity, because it is our disunity that continues our powerlessness and our suffering. So don't feel offended when black people want to get into a room by themselves and you want to come in and they say, no, 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 no. It's like the bathroom. If I go to toilet and you knock on the door, I will tell you, no, 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 no. Because that's private. I want to get myself cleaned up and fixed up so I can meet you in a better way. Black people need to come together to heal the wounds of 400 years of mistreatment. We need to get out of our system all of the bitterness that we feel, and we need to help each other to grow, so that when we come out of that room to meet you, you won't see a human being scarred with the scars of slavery and bitterness and inhumanity, you will meet a fellow human being who has had a chance to outgrow color and to grow into color blindness. But you have to give us the same chance that you have had, and we will grow and we will mature to that level by the grace of God.
This is the last question. After it is asked, please hold your seats as Minister Farrakhan is escorted out of the room.
I'm sorry, I saw this lady and this gentleman. These two we will take.
My name is Sarah Woods. I'm from the Howard University School of Divinity. I am a white student at the Howard University School of Divinity. And I first want to say I do support you in your efforts to have small groups of blacks getting together. I see that as a very healing and transformative process at the Divinity School, and I think that it has a positive effect. My question to you is, what dialogue are you having with black Christian leaders today in terms of the things that you're talking about?
Yes.
Can you give some specifics about some meetings that you're having?
Yes.
That you are in dialogue with?
Yes. I'm glad you asked that. Because as a Muslim, you know, there are traditions in Islam, in the history of Islam, that puts us at odds with Christians. And there's history among Christians that puts Christians at odds with Muslims. So when we become Muslims, we get involved in that history of the conflict between Christians and Muslims, and Muslims and Jews and Christians, and Muslims and Hindus, and Muslims and Buddhists. We get involved in that. The beauty of growing up in America and the beauty of growth, period, is that in our evolution, in our maturing, we look back at Christianity or the teachings of Christ, and we can separate the teachings of Jesus from the hypocritical actions of some of those who refer to themselves as Christians. And we can look at the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and separate those teachings from the hypocritical practice of Muslims. And we can look at the teachings of Moses and the prophets of Israel and separate those teachings from the actions of those who claim to be followers of these worthy prophets of God. In that maturity, I am dialoguing practically daily and weekly with Christian scholars and leaders. At my dinner table, over the last 3 years, we have entertained over 1,800 Christian pastors. We bring all strains of thought in the black community to the table, and we discuss principles that unite. And I preach in as many Christian churches today as I preach in mosques. And you know what? I am just as loved in those churches where I preach as I am in the mosque. You know why? Because I have found the common thread that unites, and I refuse to entertain those things that keep us apart from the solidarity needed to effect genuine change in our condition. And I would hope that this dialogue would extend to Jews, would extend to Buddhists, would extend to Hindus, would extend to those who believe in the religion of Jain, to Zoroastrians, to Taoists, to Shintos. And the more we learn about what other people believe, the more we will see the common thread of divinity that runs through it all. And if we start tugging at the common thread, we soon will pull human beings together, and we won't have a community of people at odds, but we will have people who have found common ground to struggle against the forces that if we don't struggle against them, all of us will be destroyed by our inaction to the divine principles that each religion teaches. This gentleman.
Charles Colson tonight is going to receive an award for his work with prisoners around the country.
Yes.
And Islam has had a great success with African Americans who make up a large percentage of people in our prisons. Can you say something about what has engendered that success?
Yes, sir. First, congratulations, of course, to Mr. Charles Colson, who in his own pursuit of life and its goals got into difficulty with the law and was sentenced to prison and found God and religion and has become a tremendous spokesperson for good Christian principles and has been extremely successful in prison life. We find that some of the most brilliant people are in prison. Some of our best minds are locked away. And I find that there's something wrong with the society that shares off the cream of its crop and assigns them to prison, to drugs, to the streets as homeless bums, if you will. I am not a person of high intelligence according to my intelligence quotient in the tests that I was given. I am considered average. And if you ask most of the leaders today, Mr. Clinton and most of the religious leaders, how were you rated? Most would say, I was just pretty average. What happened to your classmates and mine who had the most promise, the most intelligence? Usually, they ended up on drugs. They ended up in the waste heap. They got into criminal behavior because the most brilliant minds refused to be herded. And they refused to be bound by tradition and enslaved by dogma, so they challenged their teachers, they challenged their professors, and since as professors and teachers and religious guides, we cannot stand to be challenged, we label the brilliant ones the rebels, and we make them outcasts, and so they fill the jails of America, and so they can be redeemed. You can't be a Christian and not believe in the redemption of human beings, and you can't be a Muslim and not believe in the redemption of human beings. So when we go into prison, when you make man connect to God, the source of power and strength, and you give him a vision and you give him a way out of his dilemma, in prison especially, that man will take that way. And those young men that we teach, they don't need drugs anymore. We are high all the time. Now, I don't want you to put that on television. Say that Minister Farrakhan said he's high all the time, which I am, but I'm not high on drugs. I'm high on life. I'm high on truth. I'm high on God. And I'm high on the desire to see my people, of which I am a member, rise and humanity become human beings. And when you feed people properly, they act properly. When you enslave, that's what you get, rebellion. And unfortunately, I will say it tonight, religion has a tendency to become a slave master. Religion, through dogma, through tradition, and through time worn out rituals, try to chain men and women rather than freeing them to evolve into God. And so tonight, as we address this wonderful Parliament of World's Religions, I will not only talk on faith and family, but I want to get to the bottom of some of the problems and offer some solutions. And offer, of course, our book that we just came out with, Torchlight for America, as a possible reading for you in which you might find some answers. Thank you so much for your questions. And thank you, members of the press. I'm surprised by your questions. Thank you very much.
Hold your seats, please.